I remember that day in Texas like it happened yesterday. My hands were shaking just a bit, the way they do when I'm holding something too important, something that could change everything. The sky outside was blue as a postcard, the air heavy with the smell of fresh cut grass and barbecue smoke drifting from my neighbor's yard. My daughter's wedding day. I'd spent the last week in a whirlwind, polishing my old boots, pressing my best shirt, rehearsing what I'd say. You see, I'd always imagined that when this day came, I'd get a smile, a thank you, maybe a tear in her eye as she hugged her old man for all those years of double shifts, missed fishing trips, and home-cooked dinners after her mama passed. Instead, fate had something else waiting for me. My girl, Emily, stood there in her fancy white dress, radiant as ever. And as I walked up with an envelope, my gift for her new life, she turned to the crowd, raised her glass, and said in the clearest voice, "I always wished I had a different father." I swear you could have heard a pin drop in that Texas banquet hall. She wrapped her arms around her new father-in-law, a real big shot named Mr. Harrison, who owned half the steakhouses in Dallas. My feet felt like they were sinking in mud, but I managed to stand there and watch. Then, just like that, I turned and walked out into the parking lot, the envelope still heavy in my hand. I drove home with the radio off, every mile of the highway reminding me of the years I'd spent trying to be enough for her. I thought about her mother, Ruth, and how she'd always said, "Jack, our Emily's gonna have the life we never could." Well, I tried. Lord knows I tried. My house felt smaller than ever that night. The living room hadn't changed in decades, Ruth's old rocking chair by the window, the faded family pictures on the mantel. In every photo, I looked proud. I thought I'd given Emily everything: piano lessons, braces, private school, anything I could manage on a machinist's paycheck. I sat at the kitchen table, bills and bank statements piled up like always, and stared at the number in my savings account. $14,000. That was it. 40 years at the refinery, and all I could hand my daughter on her wedding day was a savings account that barely covered her dream dress. Emily had shown me a stack of bridal magazines, places like the Grand Oak Manor, where celebrities had their weddings. She wanted flowers flown in from California, a live jazz band, the works. I told her, Honey, maybe we can keep it simple, or I can help set up tables or cook for the guests, whatever you need." But that wasn't enough. She said her friends' fathers were taking out loans, remortgaging houses, doing whatever it took. And what was I willing to do? She stared at me with those hard, disappointed eyes and said, "You're just a failure." I didn't sleep much that night. I thought about everything I'd done since Ruth died, how I'd learned to braid Emily's hair before school, how I saved every penny so she could go to college in Austin, how I watched her grow up, thinking maybe one day she'd understand the quiet kind of love I had for her. But all she saw was what I couldn't give. Not the years. Not the effort. Just the missing dollars. Next morning, I found myself at my local bank, the kind with glass doors and marble counters that made a regular guy like me feel out of place. I asked about a loan, $50,000, enough to cover everything Emily wanted and then some. The banker, a young woman named Sarah, looked at my paperwork and said the most they could give was $35,000, at an interest rate that nearly made me laugh out loud, 19%. I signed anyway. Driving back with that cashier's check in my pocket, I felt like I'd bought a ticket back into my daughter's heart. I pictured her face lighting up, the way it used to when she was a kid and I'd bring her ice cream on a hot day. I walked up to her apartment, envelope in hand, and handed it to her with a nervous smile. She barely looked at it. "Dad, it's not needed," she said. Turns out, Mr. Harrison had decided to pay for the whole thing himself. "You don't need to worry about it anymore," Emily told me, already flipping through new wedding brochures. Her back to me. All those years, all that sacrifice. In a moment, I was nothing but an afterthought. I walked out into the Dallas heat, the check still in my pocket, and wondered, maybe Ruth would know what to do. Maybe she'd tell me to let Emily go. Maybe, just maybe, she'd say I'd already done enough. But that was just the beginning. The world outside felt too bright as I drove home, the Texas sun beating down, mocking the chill settling in my chest. At a stoplight, I watched a family cross the street, a little girl clutching her father's hand, laughing at something only the two of them shared. That ache hit deep, a longing for when Emily still looked at me like I was her whole world. But times had changed. My phone buzzed as I turned into my driveway. 3 missed calls, all from unknown numbers. Bill collectors, probably, or maybe telemarketers. Either way, I let it ring. The last thing I needed was another reminder of how little I seemed to matter. Inside, my house was quiet. Too quiet. I found myself wandering from room to room, Ruth's old sweater still draped over her chair, dust on the shelf beside Emily's graduation photo. I sat in the kitchen, the check still burning a hole in my pocket, and tried to make sense of it all. 40 years of steady work, of late nights and missed holidays, of saying no to myself so I could say yes to my girl. What did it all amount to? $12,000 in savings and a loan that would take years to pay off, if I was lucky. And for what? To be told I was a failure? To be replaced by a man with deeper pockets? I made myself a cup of coffee, Ruth's favorite blend, still half full in the pantry, and sat at the table, trying to figure out what came next. Should I keep fighting to be part of Emily's life, or finally learn how to let go? The question sat heavy on my heart. Next morning, I woke before dawn, the way I always did. Habit, I suppose. Old men like me don't sleep much anyway. I checked my bank app, just to make sure that check was still there, that I hadn't dreamed the whole thing up. It stared back at me, more money than I'd seen in one place since the day I bought the house. I called the bank and told them I needed to cancel the loan. The woman on the other end, polite but weary, explained there'd be a penalty for early repayment, $500, just for being responsible. I agreed, figuring that was the price of learning my lesson. By the afternoon, I was back at the branch, the same marble floors and glass walls making me feel small all over again. Back so soon, Mr. Walker? The banker said, a hint of concern in her voice. I nodded, handing her the check. Plans change, I replied, trying not to show how much it hurt. She clicked her pen, processed the forms, and handed me a receipt. You did the right thing, she said quietly, though she probably didn't know what I was returning or why. I smiled, thanked her, and walked out into the afternoon heat. Home felt different that night. The silence wasn't as heavy, almost peaceful. I poured myself a glass of Ruth's iced tea and sat by the window, watching the sun set over the backyard. I thought of Emily as a little girl, running barefoot through the sprinkler, laughing until she couldn't breathe. I wondered if she'd remember those days, or if they'd been replaced by fancier memories, country club parties, weekend trips, dreams I'd never been able to afford. A few days passed. I kept myself busy, fixing the gutters, mowing the lawn, clearing out Ruth's old closet. Sometimes I'd find a note from her, a grocery list in her handwriting, or a photo of us from some forgotten summer. Those small reminders kept me going. Then, one morning, the phone rang. Emily. I hesitated before picking up. Dad, she said, her voice cool but rushed. We need to talk about your outfit for the engagement party. My chest tightened. This was the first I'd heard of any engagement party. It's at Mr. Harrison's club, she continued. Nothing too formal, but… She paused, then changed her tone. Actually, maybe it's better if you sit this one out. His friends will be there, and well, you know, they expect a certain level. Her words stung. But I didn't argue. Whatever you think is best, I managed, keeping my voice steady. We hung up, and I sat at the table, staring at the phone like it might explain everything that had gone wrong. Days turned into weeks. I found myself more and more on the outside, invited to less and less. Wedding planning meetings I wasn't told about, vendor calls scheduled when I'd be busy. Even the dress fitting, a moment I'd always thought I'd share with my girl, was now something I'd attend only. If you promise not to talk too much, Dad, and please, wear something nice. I showed up anyway, wearing my best shirt and tie, feeling out of place among all the designer dresses and expensive perfumes. Emily's friends whispered to each other, casting sideways glances at this simple man in the corner. "It's nice that she includes him," one said loud enough for me to hear. Like I was some kind of charity case. That night, the loneliness felt sharper than usual. I drove out to the old cemetery where Ruth was buried, her headstone simple but cared for, daisies blooming around the edges. "Ruth," I whispered, kneeling down to clear the weeds. "What would you do?" The sky was darkening, but I stayed talking to her the way I always had, about Emily, about life, about how lost I felt without her guidance. The decision came slowly, the way all big things do. Maybe Emily needed to know the truth. Maybe it was time for her to understand what real family, real sacrifice, really looked like. I started writing a letter, something honest, something final. It took me days, and every word felt like lifting a stone. But I knew I had to do it. The next days passed in a strange kind of limbo. I kept myself busy in ways only old men do, patching a loose fence post, reorganizing the old tool shed, flipping through Ruth's recipe cards, though I rarely cooked more than eggs and toast. I ignored the steady stream of calls from Emily, most of them reminders or demands. "Don't forget about the hotel block, Dad." Or, "Can you transfer your contribution by Friday?" As if nothing had changed, as if she hadn't told me to my face that I was never enough. But in the late hours, when the Texas wind rattled the windows and the house felt emptier than ever, I found myself writing and rewriting that letter. At first, I didn't know what to say. How do you put a lifetime of love and disappointment onto a few pages? How do you explain the ache of being invisible to your own child? Ruth would have known, but all I had was her memory. By the sixth draft, I stopped trying to sound wise or forgiving. I just told the truth. "Emily," I wrote, "I've spent my life loving you in the only way I knew. I gave you all I had, even when it wasn't enough to buy what you wanted. I'm sorry if that makes me a failure in your eyes. But I hope, someday, you'll remember the nights I braided your hair, the lunches I packed, the stories I told when you were scared of thunderstorms. I hope you'll remember that I chose to stay, even when it was hard, even when I could have walked away." I signed it, tucked it into an envelope with the wedding invitation sitting on my kitchen table, and stared at it until my eyes blurred. A few days before the big day, I noticed something strange on the invitation. My ceremony time was listed as 1 o'clock. But when I called the church, the secretary told me, "No, sir, the ceremony starts at 11. My heart sank, and I realized Emily didn't even want me there for the walk down the aisle. The morning of the wedding dawned hot and bright. I dressed in my best suit, the one I'd worn for Ruth's funeral, for Emily's graduation, for every major moment in our lives. I drove to the church with the letter in my inside pocket and the wedding gift I'd planned, a simple envelope now holding nothing but the truth. When I arrived, the parking lot was already full. I saw Mr. Harrison's shiny black Escalade parked in the front, surrounded by cars that cost more than my house. As I walked up the church steps, a well-dressed stranger glanced at my invitation, frowned, and said, "You're late, sir. The ceremony's already started." I stared at the card in disbelief. 11 o'clock, not 1. My hand shook as I listened to the music spilling out from behind the closed doors, and it finally hit me. My own daughter had sent me the wrong time, on purpose, so I wouldn't be there when she needed her father most. I sat outside on a bench across the street, clutching the envelope, watching as happy guests hurried inside. I thought about all the times I'd carried Emily on my shoulders, how she'd fall asleep in the truck on the way home from Little League games, how she used to beg me for one more bedtime story. Now I was just a forgotten old man in a borrowed suit, left outside while another man walked her down the aisle. After a while, the church doors opened and the guests poured out, smiling and congratulating each other. I watched from my bench as Emily and Mr. Harrison posed for photos, their laughter ringing through the hot air. Nobody noticed me. I waited until the crowd thinned, then slipped inside for the reception. The hall was bright and full of chatter, crystal glasses clinking, bouquets of white roses on every table, a band playing soft jazz in the corner. Emily was at the center of it all, radiant in her dress, accepting hugs and compliments. She glanced my way, her smile fading for a split second before she turned to another guest. I waited for my chance, then walked up to her quietly and handed her the envelope. "This is for you," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was breaking. She took it, her eyes searching mine for a hint of anger or blame. But I just nodded, stepped back, and blended into the crowd of strangers. The evening carried on, dancing, speeches, laughter. At one point, Emily took the microphone and raised a toast. "I want to thank my new family for making all my dreams come true," she said, her voice clear and strong. "And to Mr. Harrison, for showing me what it means to have a real father." For a moment, the room went silent. I watched as Mr. Harrison smiled and wrapped an arm around her. My chest felt hollow, but I held my head high. I'd done what I could. I'd given everything I had. I left before they cut the cake. Outside, the Texas stars were bright, the air cooling as the sun dipped below the horizon. I got in my old truck, started the engine, and drove away from the wedding, away from the noise and lights, and toward the only peace I knew, an honest life, lived without regret. But even then, I knew my story wasn't over. Sometimes the truest gifts aren't money or parties, but the courage to tell the truth, and the strength to let go. The drive home that night felt different. The world outside was wide and empty, Texas highways stretching into darkness, headlights from oncoming cars nothing but fleeting ghosts. I thought about calling someone, an old friend, maybe, or my brother back in Oklahoma. But what would I say? That I'd been replaced? That a lifetime of work and sacrifice could be erased with a single toast in a crowded room? Instead, I went home and did what I always did when the world spun too fast. I made a pot of Ruth's tea and sat on the porch, listening to the crickets and watching the stars blink on one by one. I tried to remember the last time Emily had sat here with me, just talking, without phones or distractions or wedding plans. It must have been years. For a long time, I thought maybe this was the end. That my story had reached its last chapter, and it was time to fade quietly into the background. But in the silence, something unexpected stirred, a kind of calm I hadn't felt in months, maybe years. I realized that my love for Emily didn't depend on thank yous or wedding invitations. I loved her because that's what fathers do, even when it hurts. In the days after the wedding, Emily didn't call. She didn't text, not even to ask about the letter I'd given her. At first, that stung worse than any insult. But as the days stretched into a week, and then two, I found a new routine. I cleaned the house top to bottom, fixing things I'd ignored for years. I started cooking again, even tried one of Ruth's old recipes for cornbread, which came out dry but edible. Sometimes I'd see neighbors out walking their dogs and they'd wave, asking how the wedding went. I'd smile and say it was beautiful, even though my voice cracked a little each time. People don't really want to hear about broken hearts at the mailbox. Then late one afternoon my phone buzzed. Emily's name flashed on the screen. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but old habits die hard. "Dad?" Her voice was tight, anxious. We need to talk about the house." I frowned. "What about the house, Em?" She hesitated, and I heard voices in the background. Her new husband, maybe, or Mr. Harrison. "There's a, financial advisor who thinks it might be best if you consider selling." The market's hot right now, and it hit me then. All those years of scraping by, pinching pennies, and now, when she had everything she'd ever wanted, the house was just another asset. Something to trade for a bigger apartment, a down payment on a new life. Emily, I said quietly, your mother and I built this house with our own hands. Every floorboard, every nail. It's not just a number on a page. I know, Dad. But times change. Mr. Harrison says you shouldn't have to worry about maintenance or taxes, and I let her finish, even though my heart ached with every word. When she was done, I took a slow breath. I'll think about it, I promised, not wanting to argue. But some things are worth more than money. You might understand that one day. We hung up, and I sat there for a long time, the phone heavy in my hand. I thought about all the sacrifices Ruth and I had made for Emily, how we'd eaten canned beans for weeks just to buy her a new bicycle one Christmas, how Ruth had sewn her dresses by hand when money was tight. None of that showed up in bank statements. The next morning, I called a lawyer, a friend of Ruth's from church, a quiet man named Mr. Scott. I explained everything: the house, the loan, the wedding, Emily's requests. He listened patiently, then gave me simple advice. Jack, you have every right to keep your house. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. If you want, I can help you put it in a trust. Make sure it stays in the family, no matter what. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had control. Not over Emily's choices, not over the past, but over my own story. I gathered every document I could find, deeds, savings, Ruth's will, and brought them to Mr. Scott. We worked quietly, making sure my wishes were clear, that nobody could take what Ruth and I had built together. Afterward, I stopped by Ruth's grave. The air was warm and still, the grass bright green from spring rain. I told her everything, about the wedding, about Emily's toast, about the letter and the house. I promised her I'd protect what mattered, even if it meant standing alone. That night back home, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and realized something important. Life is full of moments when you have to choose between holding on and letting go. Sometimes you have to do both at once: hold on to your memories, let go of your expectations. As the sun set over the backyard, painting everything gold and pink, I felt a strange sense of peace. Maybe Emily would never understand all I'd given. Maybe she'd always chase bigger dreams, newer things. But I would always be her father, the man who stayed, the man who kept the light on, just in case she ever wanted to come home. And in that quiet moment, I knew I was enough. Weeks slipped by, each one a little easier than the last. I threw myself into the routines that had always given me purpose. Mornings started with coffee on the porch, and the old radio humming Willie Nelson songs. Afternoons, I'd walk the perimeter of the backyard, making sure the garden Ruth once loved was free of weeds and the fence was standing straight. There was a comfort in repetition, the kind a man only learns after decades of doing for others. Sometimes, at the grocery store or post office, people would ask, "How's married life treating Emily?" I'd give them the kind of smile that says, "Let's not dig too deep," and answer, "She's happy. That's all a father wants." That was true in a way. But sometimes I wondered if she really was. Every so often, Emily would call. Not to ask how I was, but for some logistical thing, a bank statement, a signature on a document, or a piece of information she'd forgotten about the house. I answered each time, because that's what fathers do. I made sure my tone was warm, my answers patient. But I could hear the distance in her voice, the same distance that had grown between us all these years, built up from every little misunderstanding, every unmet expectation, every moment where love and gratitude were replaced by need. Then one day, a letter arrived, heavy cream paper, gold embossed edges. Emily's handwriting on the envelope, formal and neat, just like Ruth had taught her. Inside was an invitation to a baby shower, hosted by Mrs. Harrison at some grand estate outside Dallas. "We'd love to see you there, Dad," Emily wrote. "But if you can't make it, I understand. I know these things aren't really your scene." I read the line twice, my hands trembling a little. Ruth would have been over the moon at the thought of a grandchild. She would have started knitting blankets, shopping for tiny socks. For a moment, the loneliness was so sharp I had to sit down. I stared at the invitation for a long time. There was a part of me that wanted to go, to try again, to be part of this new chapter in Emily's life. But there was another part, older, wiser, and maybe just a little tired, that wondered if showing up would do any good. Would I just be another face in the crowd, another name on a list of people who'd contributed but never quite measured up? Still, I decided to try. I bought a small gift, a silver rattle with Emily's initials engraved on it, the same way Ruth's father had done for her. I ironed my best shirt, polished my boots, and made the long drive to the estate, winding through neighborhoods that looked nothing like the one I'd raised Emily in. The gatekeeper checked my name, barely glancing at me before waving me through. Inside, the house was filled with people I didn't recognize, Emily's friends from college, her new in-laws, women in expensive dresses talking about summer trips to Europe and new kitchen renovations. Emily saw me and hurried over, her smile polite but reserved. "Dad, you made it!" "Thank you," she said, hugging me quickly before steering me toward a table with some of Mr. Harrison's old golf buddies. I tried to keep up with their talk of investments and vacation homes, but felt out of place. Whenever I looked for Emily, she was busy, laughing with friends or posing for photos, always just out of reach. At one point, I wandered onto the back porch, away from the noise. I sipped sweet tea and looked out over the rolling hills, thinking of simpler days when Emily was a child and the backyard was her whole world. A voice behind me broke the quiet. It was Mrs. Harrison, elegant in pearls and heels that never seemed to touch the ground. "Jack, isn't it wonderful? Emily's so lucky to have a family that can support her dreams. And the nursery we're putting together, it'll be the best in Texas. I hope you don't feel left out, with all the planning." I smiled and nodded, though her words stung. Left out was exactly how I felt, like an extra in a play where I'd once been the star. I set my tea down and slipped away soon after, leaving the gift on the table with the others. Driving home that evening, I thought about the way Emily had looked at me, grateful, maybe, but also apologetic. I wondered if she knew how hard it was for me to walk into a room full of strangers, to pretend that money or status could ever replace the memories Ruth and I had tried to give her. That night, I took out an old photo album, the one Ruth had started when Emily was born. Page after page of birthdays, fishing trips, school plays, Ruth's handwritten notes in the margins. Emily's first steps, Jack teaching her to ride a bike, family camping trip, rain the whole weekend, but still smiling. I ran my fingers over the pictures, letting the memories wash over me. I realized something then. Life wasn't about grand gestures or expensive parties. It was about the quiet, everyday moments, the ones that don't get mentioned in toasts or engraved on trophies, but that stay with you long after everyone else has moved on. Maybe Emily would understand that someday. Maybe not. Either way, I'd keep living my life the only way I knew, honest, humble, and hopeful. After that baby shower, things settled into a rhythm again, but it wasn't the rhythm of a happy family. It was something quieter, lonelier. I still called Emily every Sunday afternoon, just to check in, but our conversations were short and formal. She'd talk about the nursery, the latest ultrasound, and her hopes for the baby. Every now and then she'd ask if I was managing all right, but the words felt more like an obligation than real concern. And through it all, I kept up my routines. Church on Sundays, coffee at the local diner on Wednesdays, a weekly poker night with a few other retirees. Life was simple, small, but it was mine. Most days, I felt okay with that. But sometimes, when the house felt too quiet, when Ruth's old rocking chair creaked in the wind, I wondered if I'd lost my place in the only family I had left. Then, one rainy night, Emily called, her voice different, shaky, like she was holding back tears. "Dad, can I come over?" "Of course, sweetheart. You don't have to ask." 20 minutes later, she was standing in my doorway, her hair damp, cheeks red, and something heavy in her eyes. She didn't say a word, just hugged me tight, the way she hadn't done since she was a teenager. I held her, feeling her shoulders tremble. For a long moment, I just let her cry. When she finally pulled away, she wiped her eyes and sat at the kitchen table, where Ruth used to serve cocoa on stormy nights. "Everything's changing so fast," she whispered. "The baby, the house, the way everyone expects me to be someone I'm not. Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning, Dad." I sat across from her, the old aches in my heart fading a bit. "You don't have to be anyone but yourself," I told her. "You're still my little girl." She smiled, a real one, not the tight, practiced thing I'd grown used to. "I miss Mom," she said quietly. "I know, honey. I miss her too, every single day." We talked for hours, the way we used to when Ruth was alive. Emily told me about the pressures of fitting into the Harrisons' world, the feeling of never quite measuring up, of being judged for how she dressed, talked, even how she laughed. "They mean well," she admitted, "but sometimes I feel like a stranger in my own life." I listened, offered what advice I could. But mostly, I just let her talk, hoping she could find her way back to herself, and maybe to me. Before she left, she hugged me again, holding on longer this time. "Thank you, Dad, for everything." After she drove away, I sat alone in the quiet, feeling a strange sense of peace. Maybe things weren't perfect, but that night reminded me that family isn't about grand gestures. It's about showing up, listening, loving each other through the storms. Days passed, and Emily began calling more often, sometimes just to chat, sometimes for advice. She wanted to know how to make Ruth's cornbread, how to fix a leaky faucet, what to say when she felt overwhelmed at work. Slowly, the distance between us began to close. Then, one afternoon, she called with real excitement in her voice. "Dad, would you come visit the house? I want to show you the nursery." I agreed, though I felt a little nervous. The last time I'd been there, I'd felt like a ghost. But when I arrived, Emily greeted me with a warm smile and led me inside. The nursery was beautiful, simple, not flashy, but filled with soft colors, storybooks, and a hand-me-down rocking chair. "Mr. Harrison's decorator wanted to do everything in white and gold, but I told him I wanted it to feel like home," Emily explained. "Like how Mom used to decorate, warm and cozy." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Your mother would be proud, Em." We spent the afternoon talking about the baby, laughing about old memories, making plans for the future. As I was leaving, Emily hugged me at the door and pressed something into my hand. "Dad, I want you to have this. It's the first ultrasound picture, so you can show Grandma Ruth when you visit." I held the photo carefully, tears pricking my eyes. "Thank you, sweetheart." Driving home, I realized how much had changed. I might never be rich, never have the grand house or the fancy friends, but I had something better, a daughter who still needed her dad, even after all the hurts and misunderstandings. I'd learned that love isn't about being perfect, or even always being enough. It's about never giving up on each other, no matter how far apart life takes you. And as I sat on my porch that night, holding that little black and white photo, I whispered a quiet prayer of thanks, to Ruth, to God, and to the winding, unpredictable road that had brought my family back together, piece by piece. The months rolled forward, each one marked by small changes, cautious hope, and the slow mending of old wounds. Summer in Texas always comes with thunderclouds and wildflowers, and as July faded into August, I found myself feeling lighter than I had in years. Emily kept calling, sometimes just to share a recipe, sometimes to ask about baby names, sometimes for no reason at all. Her husband, Greg Harrison, even started calling me Dad. Awkward at first, but, over time, more natural. At first, I kept waiting for another shoe to drop, for some new demand, some new disappointment. But it never came. Instead, there was only the steady, gentle return of family. When Emily finally went into labor, it was a muggy Friday night in late September. She called me herself, her voice trembling with excitement and fear. Dad, it's time! She laughed. Greg's driving like a maniac. Can you meet us at the hospital? I rushed out the door, heart pounding. The drive to Dallas General felt endless, but when I finally walked into the hospital lobby, Emily and Greg were already waiting, their faces flushed and anxious. Dad, she said, hugging me tight. I'm glad you're here. The hours crawled by in that white-tiled waiting room. I sat with Greg, trading stories and nervous jokes, thinking about the days when I held Emily as a baby, when Ruth would hum lullabies under her breath, when the world felt smaller, simpler. Finally, just as the sun was rising, a nurse peeked in with a smile. Congratulations, Grandpa. You've got a beautiful baby girl. I don't remember standing up, but suddenly I was in the room, Emily beaming with pride and exhaustion, Greg crying as he held their tiny daughter. I looked down at the newest walker in the world, soft cheeks, a tuft of dark hair, eyes blinking at the bright light. She's perfect, I whispered, voice thick. She's got Ruth's chin. Emily smiled through her tears. Dad, we named her Grace Ruth. I wanted her to have something of Mom with her, always. For a moment, time stood still. I remembered Ruth's voice, her gentle laugh, the warmth of her hand in mine. I felt her there in that room, in the soft hush of morning, in the hope that came with new life. The first days with Grace were a blur of diapers, midnight feedings, and wonder. Emily asked for my help with everything, changing the baby, rocking her to sleep, even teaching Grace to love the old country songs Ruth used to sing. Every moment was a gift I hadn't expected to receive. The old house, once filled with so much loneliness, felt alive again. Emily visited every week, sometimes staying for days. Greg brought his own father over for Sunday dinners, and together we grilled steaks, told stories, and laughed in the glow of the porch light. I taught Grace how to wave, how to hold a spoon, how to clap her hands in time with the music. Each milestone felt like a small miracle. Sometimes, late at night, Emily and I would sit on the porch, watching the stars. I'm sorry, Dad, she said one evening, her voice quiet and honest. For the wedding, for all the times I made you feel like you weren't enough. I was lost, and I took it out on you. I squeezed her hand, my voice steady. You don't have to apologize, Em. We all lose our way sometimes. I never stopped loving you. Not once. She smiled, tears shining in her eyes. Thank you for not giving up on me. We sat in silence, the kind of silence that only comes after the truth has been spoken and forgiven. In that moment I knew that Ruth was watching over us, proud of the family she'd helped to build, and grateful that we'd found our way back to one another. As Grace grew, so did our bond. I became Grandpa Jack, the man who always had a cookie in his pocket, who could fix any broken toy, who told stories of a simpler time. Emily and Greg started bringing Grace to church, to picnics, to every family gathering. The pain of old wounds faded into memory, replaced by laughter and love. On Grace's first birthday, we held a big party in my backyard. There were balloons, barbecue, and more hugs than I'd gotten in a decade. Greg's parents came, neighbors dropped by, and for the first time in a long while, I looked around and saw a family whole and unbroken. As the sun set, Emily handed me a small box. Inside was a framed photo of Ruth, smiling in the garden, and beside it, a picture of me holding baby Grace. For you, Dad, she said softly. So you'll never forget how much you mean to us. I felt tears in my eyes, but I didn't hide them. I held the frame close, my heart full. That night, as the stars shone bright above, I realized that my story wasn't one of loss or regret. It was a story of holding on, through heartache, through misunderstanding, through the long, lonely seasons, until love returned, unexpected and overflowing. Ruth had been right all along. Love is not what you get. It's what you give, and give, and give, until the day it comes back to you. So I rocked my granddaughter in my arms, sang her the songs Ruth once sang to Emily, and promised myself I would never again doubt the worth of a father's love. No matter what life took from me, I was rich, richer than I'd ever dreamed. Because in the end, I still had family, forgiveness, and the kind of love that outlasts any storm. And for the first time in years, I truly felt at home.